I'm cutting this out for the machine applique, and I've starched the fabric 4 times, and I want to just get this excess off here. These will be included in the pattern. I want to explain the freezer paper. What happens with the freezer paper when you put it on top, it stabilizes everything, so your accuracy just goes way up with that. Although we've starched it 4 times, the reason for starching that is that when the machine stitches out the applique and finishes the edges, if it's not starched 4 times, it'll be ravelly and the fibers won't stay together. So technically what we're doing with the starch is gluing the fibers together so the machine can actually do the work. I've pressed the piece to the right side of the fabric. I cut slightly to the inside, and you want to be as accurate as possible. Okay, this is the outside of the block, so I'm leaving a little extra just in case on the outside. I'm going to go ahead and do the leaves. And you want to make sure that the freezer paper is pressed really stable to the fabric, and then cut that out. If you spray starch your pieces and then put your fusible on, you're going to have much more success with it. The fusible will stay on better. Sometimes it kind of falls away and doesn't really hold as accurate, and the starch really helps that. So we cut our leaf out, and I'm just going to do a few pieces of this. I've cut along this line and on the inside. We want to make sure that you cut to the inside of the line just slightly. So basically we're just cutting the dark off. When you're doing the embroidery, you need to be really accurate because the stitching won't catch these edges if it's all wonky. So you want to make sure that you stay really accurate. When you're getting ready to do the stitching on the piece, the machine will stitch out the placement lines. And I use a light gray. So if you're going to a dark, it works, and it hides really nicely. So it's a real light gray. You want to pull your freezer paper off. Now I only use the freezer paper once because it gets distorted, and when you press the freezer paper, it actually shrinks a little bit. So you want to just use it once. So we have our glue. These tips are available on my daughter's website, and what you need is a real fine tip to put that glue where it needs to be. You want it just to the inside. You don't want it on that line. You want it just to the inside. And we want a solid line. What we're doing here is actually creating the space for the machine to catch that edge. And what happens with this type of applique, whether you're doing it on a regular machine or doing it in the embroidery machine, is you want that edge to be good and solid, and you also want it to be a little bit stiff so the stitches will land correctly. And so when I put this line of glue on the inside, when we actually press the fabric, it creates a real solid edge so the machine can stitch it out appropriately. So I put the glue on that placement. We have our piece here, and I want to just barely see that placement line. So your fabric is slightly to the inside of the placement line. You can kind of stretch it a little bit if you need to. See how this is a little bit far out? So you can just move it over. And if you're using fusible, you really can't align it. You've got to kind of get it there. And with the glue, you have, it's tacky, so you can manipulate where you want that to be placed. And I use a Teflon pressing sheet, and you want to put your iron on. Do not move your iron around because it'll still shift your applique. So you just put it on there. And I like to count till 10 because when you have the Teflon, it actually stops the heat just a little bit. You want to make sure that that's nice and dry. If you look really close, you can see just a tiny little bit of the glue coming out. Don't worry about that. The stitch is wide enough to cover that. Now we have our freezer paper, and I just take on the corner or on a small area and just bend it over, and that'll pull your freezer paper away from the fabric. Then you pull it out. It's the same rule with placing it. And you can use tweezers if you want. So we want to be able to see the stitching line. And if you were to do this the normal way, where they stitch a placement line, you put fabric on and then trim, you couldn't get into the really tiny corners. So what would happen then is there's no way of trimming that out right there. And you get color in the wrong places, and you don't have the same kind of accuracy. And quite frankly, if I'm trying to trim while it's in the hoop, there are so many problems for me. I have trimmers. I can't do it. I just can't. I will cut stuff, and it's just not an option for me. So this works very well, and it's actually very, very quick. And there's really no waste with this. You use your scraps and better management tools with the pieces. You can put a certain color in a certain place. And like this color could be a different color than the flowers. So, it would be really hard to do that if you use a placement line and then try to trim your fabric out. So we want to place this down and make sure you start it from center out. And you want to be able to see the actual placement line. This is now ready for the embroidery.